What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's hop right into it. So our first story of the day is we have Sam Altman announcing that OpenAI has done more than 1 billion of ARR in the last month just from their API business. And that's really interesting to see. I'm not sure exactly what the growth looks like for their revenue, so it's kind of hard to tell. It doesn't really give the full picture. But I do wonder what exactly that sales pitch looks like. I know it's probably just ChatGPT without them training on your data or giving you some tools, like you can create the projects, I know, and you can like give it files and access to different things. But it would be interesting as well to see like which models are being used. Like, is this 5.2 Pro or is this just is this 5.2 Pro? It would be interesting to see what models this is. Like, is this just 5.2 Pro or is it the faster models or Codex, for example? We're going to have to keep our eyes on these foundational LLM model companies because Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, etc., are all kind of building the infrastructure. They're attempting to build the products on top. That's what the Sora app was for. Obviously, it's a flop because nobody wants to use AI-generated social media yet. It is interesting to see this diversified revenue. I am still not, my companies aren't on the ChatGPT wave. We're not using any of their enterprise anymore now that we've all moved to Claude, but it is cool to see. Here we have a tweet from Rune. I'm not sure exactly what his status is, but I know that he works at OpenAI, I guess on the technical side. But he is saying something very interesting, which is that there will be a cultural change at many software organizations soon where people declare quote unquote bankruptcy on understanding the code they're committing. Sooner or later, this will cause a systems failure that will be harder to debug than most, but will be resolved anyways. I really like this point for a few reasons. One is that he says this will cause a systems failure if humans stop understanding the code that's being written by the AIs, but he also says that it will be resolved. And that's just kind of the name of the game for technology, engineering, and just humanity and progress in general. We have these huge problems, but we always end up resolving it. I do like this message, however, of humans needing to still be the drivers of understanding code from a debugging perspective, from an accountability perspective. We do still need to understand the code, and that gets to the PR review stuff that we'll talk about later. But it's like the PR review is the last synchronous piece. The code can be delivered very quickly through these LLMs in a sandbox environment. You can run tests, etc., but you need to be able to understand what's happening. You need to review it before it gets approved and make sure that you're following all the principles of the company, the code design style, etc., which can all be baked into the prompts, which is the most fascinating part because we're bringing all the best practices back. Now we don't have to actually utilize time to incorporate them. We can have well-documented code. We can have really nice, simple functions. The AIs obviously try to write really big functions, I think just because they were trained on tutorial code, and tutorial code has always been bad and not observable and not production ready and doesn't have good error fallbacks. But with the right prompts and with the right harness and skills, I think we can deliver really nice, clean code, very small functions, almost Uncle Bob style clean code. And we will see a lot of benefit from that, especially on the PR review and the debug side, because it'll just be so easy to read code like pros, quote unquote, is what people were saying 10 years ago. But it's become more true than ever that we need to be able to read code very systematically. The human needs to understand what's going on, and we need to leverage the AI tools to make the code super clean, not just leverage AI tools to have a bunch of slop. Next, we have an interesting tweet from this guy, Left Tail Guy. I don't know who he is, just some random tweeter. And I don't even know how true this is, but I thought it was fascinating. He's saying that Palantir is worth more than Anthropic, who is the creator of Claude, and Anthropic is nearly 2 times the revenue run rate and more than 2 times the revenue growth rate. And 2026 is going to be a fun one. He's right about that. It's very interesting. I know Palantir is super leveraged. Like, people have made a lot of money. It was like $10, then it was like $100. So a lot of money has been made, and I know the PE ratio is extremely high, but it is very interesting to see. It also kind of speaks to the fact that these companies aren't going public as soon as they used to. Palantir was very much about trying to go public so the retail investors could make money. At least that's what they said. They were able to accomplish that, whereas OpenAI, Anthropic, Stripe, etc., none of them are going public, so no retail investors are able to make money. They're almost fully leveraged on their valuation, and their PEs, I'm sure, are very high. I don't know for Stripe specifically, but for the foundational models, of course, they're spending way more than they're making. They're probably not even profitable. It will be interesting to see if they IPO this year or next year, but just a cool insight on kind of the relative value of these different companies. And obviously, as this tweet says here, Anthropic is in a more competitive space. Palantir kind of owns their space, whereas no one really knows what the future of the foundational models are. They kind of bounce around who is the top dog at any given point of the year, but all of them are going to be valuable, and they're building the infrastructure of the future products for sure. Next, we have some big drama. I actually wasn't tapped into this previously, this flickering issue, I guess, that was happening with Claude Code. I guess it was on like specific operating systems or setups, so it wasn't available to everyone. But they've said that they rolled out a fix for flickering to everyone on Claude Code. But the drama comes in is how they explain how they actually build the TUI, which is the terminal UI for Claude Code. and they're saying for each frame, our pipeline they claim to think of it as a small game engine, but then they say for each frame, our pipeline constructs a scene graph with React, then lays out elements, rasterizes them to 2D screen, diffs that against the previous screen, finally uses the diff to generate ANSI sequences to draw. We have a 16 millisecond frame budget, so roughly 5 milliseconds to go from the React scene to the ANSI written. And people are pissed about this, obviously. You know, all the React haters, like some things never change. People are going to hate React. They're going to hate JavaScript forever. So he's gotten a lot of responses. You know, Prime is like, if Jay Blow sees this, who is a like we have Primeagen here, for example, that says if Jonathan Blow sees this, it would be a shame. Jonathan Blow is a game developer. He has his own programming language called Jai. I think he's very focused on performance, like C++. He used to make fun of like Visual Studio all the time, like calling it the worst software ever. So it's kind of like Claude Code's like the modern version of that. And people are just freaking out. They're like, why are you using React for a 2E? 16 millisecond budget, trash. So it's just fun to see, like kind of some old time drama. You know, we can laugh at it, and all the people that hate React will continue to, and React will just continue to take over the game. But just a quick one, feel free to leave your thoughts on where you sit with React for 2Es or just abstractions in general and versus writing really solid low-level code. Next, we have a tweet from Dylan Mulroy, who is a principal engineer at Cloudflare, talking about the code review tools that are coming out, specifically Devin, which we covered yesterday. He says they're solving real problems, but not the biggest problem. I need a way to review code effectively before it ever gets to GitHub. My simple response to this would be just create a skill called code review before you have AI push up a PR, which it should because it writes the best descriptions and summaries, etc. Just have it run some skill that reviews all the code principles, you know, runs tests or something, and just make sure that it's solid code. I guess he wants a UI where he's able to review the code, because that's where he talks about on this tweet, is that his issue is not AI reviewing the code, but me reviewing it. So I guess the skill doesn't fully cover that, but I do think that's a big piece, is just run the skill before the GitHub Copilot or whatever on GitHub runs it. And, you know, Copilot has horrible recommendations. It's missing a lot of stuff, missing a lot of context a lot of the time. So it's actually better to have the local Claude Code, because you can have an MCP or whatever, you know, talk to the Confluence, talk to the docs, make sure everything's aligned. But in terms of UI for actually reviewing code, there is innovation still yet to happen. That's what Linear's trying to do. That's what Devin's trying to do. Someone will probably do a local version, but at the end of the day, we are looking at diffs. We are looking at code. I know we want these like AI-driven comments that explain exactly what the diff is doing, but that's where it kind of gets back to the first principles as well, of like, we should be designing code that reads as prose, quote unquote, is what people used to say, which means it's clean, it's readable, it's composed of smaller functions that are also clean and readable, as opposed to just dropping everything in one function and then having to have comments explain it or just trying to read it yourself. Next, we have an announcement that Vercel sandboxes now support file system snapshots. This is a really cool update because a lot of people are using sandboxes to clone Git repos to then use grep operations on them for AI agents. I don't have experience with Vercel Sandbox yet. I actually used Cloudflare Sandbox because I thought it was like the best practice, but it turns out Cloudflare actually copied that from Vercel, so I will have to try this out. But if you have like a sandbox system, instead of having to create a new sandbox every time they write, like if you imagine a Claude Code web like system where they always clone the repo and make a new PR in the sandbox, you can imagine that they don't have to do the git clone every time. I'm sure that saves a lot of bandwidth and saves a lot of time and latency as well. And you can just create a sandbox and use the snapshot of the code, and then you have it all installed immediately and ready to run commands on, such as grep. It will be interesting to see kind of how the diff works. Like if you change something in the repo, how easy is it to update the snapshot? It doesn't go super clear. Also, people were talking about how they're not clear on what exactly the memory limit is or the disk storage space limit is, but I'm sure we'll find out more, and I definitely want to test out Sandbox soon from Vercel. And then lastly, we have a quick update from Elon, which is that the Tesla Optimus team is hiring for AI or electromechanical engineering. If you're into robotics, if you're into AI chip design, I'm sure they're also hiring for that as well. We talked about recently how they just finished the AI 5 chip, and they're going to start working on the Dojo 3 supercomputer data center again. Just something cool to check out if you're interested in one of these projects. This kind of stuff interests you and you want to talk with some like-minded people, join the Audinato Discord in the description. Thanks.